You're welcome back. It's talk time. An investigative report by intelligence magazine Economic Confidential has revealed that Nigeria's federal and state governments shared a total of 2.6 trillion naira from the Federation account in 2016 in spite of the prevailing recession. Well, we're now joined by an economist, Henry Boyo. He needs no introduction. But before we go into all of that, the discussions, let Mike,
let me go to my wall.
But
Henry,
first off, let's say
good
welcome.
To see you.
It's
good
good
morning.
to have you on the show.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to my wall and let's have the discussion from there. Okay. All right. Now, in the report we talked about, released by the Economic Confidential, Lagos State received the highest gross allocation with a total sum of 178 billion naira for the year within the 2016 year calendar. And then Akwa Ibom State got 150 billion naira, and Delta State got 126 billion naira, and Kano State 111. Yeah, Kano State there, Delta State, River State, Cross River State, Lagos State, and that's from the 2.6 trillion naira. Now, these 5 states got a quarter. That's about 25% of the total allocation for states and local government councils. Now, let's get to, that's the highest point. Let's get to the lowest point in here. All right. Now, the lowest recipients in the allocation, one is Gombe State, got about 46 billion naira, and by Ekiti State also, and as well as Nasarawa State, that got 47 billion each, with Kwara State 49 billion. That's the lowest point of things. Now, moving ahead. Now, factors that influence allocations to states and local government councils from the Federation account include population. We just talked about population in here. We talked about derivation, landmass, the terrain, revenue efforts, school enrollment, health facility. Now, these are some of the water supply. These are some of the factors that determine how much money is allocated to this state or the other states, and so on. Getting along. Now, before the federal government officially declared that Nigeria was in a recession in 2016, remember the time the Minister of Finance came to say that Nigeria is technically, she used the word technically in recession, but there were the news abound that Nigeria was in recession even before she came out with that. 17 states were reportedly able to meet up with recurrent needs, but according to a report by budget.com, only 3 states can now meet recurrent obligations. The report showed that only Lagos, Rivers, and Enugu states are the ones that can fulfill obligations to workers presently. Now, others have fallen short one way or the other, owing salaries between 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, depending on which one we're talking about. Now, Zamfara State, Gombe State, Edo State, Kebbi State, Ebonyi State, Niger, Katsina State, and Anambra States fare very, if you have to weigh them on the scale, they had shortfalls in all of that. Then, if we move on, Delta State, Lagos, and Akwa Ibom are the states with the highest domestic debts. And an analysis of states' external debt profile showed that Lagos, Kano, and Edo are the top of the table, with Yobe, Borno, and Taraba occupying the bottom spots. Now, moving on, the National Bureau of Statistics said that Nigeria is in its worst economic recession in 29 years. But let's take a look at how some states have been coping with the recession. Now, Anambra State has been depending largely on its internally generated revenues, estimated at 1.2 billion naira monthly and over 15 billion annually, now for survival. The state also relies on domestic borrowing. Now, if we move ahead from Anambra State now to, for Oyo State, it's the slashing of salaries and arrears of political appointees by 50%, as well as blockage of tax leakages as the state government continues to explore other avenues of boosting its internally generated revenue. Adamawa State, Kano, Kaduna, Abia, and Bauchi are some other states that have also followed the path of Oyo State, looking for ways to cope with the circumstances during the recession. Now, for Jigawa and Yobe State, it's the cutting down of cost of governance. It's their own strategy of being at the forefront of living by example and ensuring that they cope with the circumstances too. Now, if we leave Jigawa and Yobe State, what Lagos, Ogun, and Enugu State have been able to stay afloat depending on their IGR. Now, in this regard, Lagos State has been a shining example, and its IGR surpasses its FAAC federal allocation for 2016. Lagos State generated more IGR than 32 states combined, including Rivers, Delta, and Ogun State, whose IGRs are very impressive. Now, if we ask the question, let me ask Harry in here. We have had lots and lots and lots of monies, if we call them running into billions that have been allocated to states. Has there really been, on the overview, has there been justification for all of this monies allocated to states combined with the generated revenues from different states to the average Nigerian?
Thank you, Mike. I think we should be careful here when you say too much money, whether too much money is actually available. 2.6 trillion naira is about $8 billion. $8 billion.
No, I was even saying so much money.
$8 billion.
Okay.
I mean, for almost 200 million people, I think it's not even modest. It's unfortunately, how would I say it, inadequate But having said so, we shouldn't continue to promote the expectation that a federation should compose of states that go begging for money from the center. I think that really is the issue. Because for a very long time, most states forgot that there is a possibility of collecting tax from their people. Why bother to collect tax when you could, at the end of the month, take a trip to Abuja and come back with a suitcase full of money? So the amount in question is not impressive at all. And the reason why people focus on the spending of government, even though that is important to drive an economy, is that they believe that it is the budgets of states and the federal that actually will drive your economy. How much is the total amount of the federal budget? Even this year, 7.3 trillion or whatever, that's about $25 billion. That's peanuts for a country with 200 million people. So really, it isn't the amount that government spends that is the important thing. It is the spending that is available in the private sector. That is what drives growth. Economy. Unfortunately, we focus on the size of the budgets and things like that, which is rather unfortunate.
You said something in your contribution there, that we cannot continue to promote the idea of states going to federal government to get money and all of that. Are you saying that we should scrap it? There are those who are saying, on the one hand, that look, there's a need for fiscal autonomy or fiscal federation or fiscal restructuring and all of that. Is that what Nigeria needs to solve this problem once and for all?
Well, put it this way, Ngozi. If you ever decided that a state was created so that it could be supported by the center, then the essence of that state creation is probably worrisome, because a state should be able to take care of its needs. And it's rather unfortunate that within the structure for making these allocations or dividing the booty kind of thing, you make population a positive issue. To my mind, the population should be a requirement for you to make a contribution to the center. In other words, the larger your population, the greater is the responsibility of the federal to you. So you should be making a contribution to the federal, a greater contribution than expecting that because you have a huge population, then of course you're encouraging people to just procreate, they call it, or just irreverently. So I would suggest that, like you rightly say, fiscal federalism or whatever name it's called, I think that should be the path of sanity, because you don't create a state and say, I'll create you and you'll get money, and people start thinking that the only way that a state can survive is by going to the federal government and then taking money every month. And of course, we all know the practices that are associated with having to, in a federal setup, the states are not truly subservient, shouldn't really be subservient to the federal. They are co-partners rather than...
they shouldn't be, but they are.
At the moment, yes, they are.
All right. Now, before I go to my wall back again, I still have some analysis in there. Now, one of the many interviews granted by the finance minister, she explained how Nigeria has been grappling to survive the harsh times. Let's play that interview for you.
2005, we were given debt forgiveness, and that was a very exciting time for Nigerians, and we were all very excited. What's happened in that last 10 years is actually, on average, our compound GDP has been negative. We've been growing in the wrong direction. At the same time, we've increased our debt levels. We've actually gone back up. We now owe as much as we owed before debt forgiveness. So what this administration is trying to do is move the economy in a different direction. In order to do that, we have to address certain things. One, we have been borrowing to pay salaries for years. That has to stop. We spend 165 billion every month on salaries. When I came in, there was no checking. Now we've put that in place. On a monthly basis, there's a unit, they do nothing else than checking salaries, checking who's getting paid, checking everything, and they're catching people out, and we're going to continue, and people will be prosecuted. So we're keeping down our recurrent expenditure so that we have enough money for capital investment. Nigeria needs to look at this oil price that went from 110, we have nothing to show for it. Name one major project the federal government has done in the last 5 years. Nothing. So when we make people accountable for every naira, this economy can change. But I want to assure you that if we can just endure these difficult times, in a year's time it's a different economy. Right now, despite all our challenges, people are coming into the Ministry of Finance, they want to do deals. They want to open factories. Someone came the other day, I want to open an airline. They see the opportunities in Nigeria. I want Nigerians now to look in. What is in your village? What is in your hometown? What can be done? Because this is the opportunity to really reposition and grow this economy. And if you look at all the fundamentals, it's all there, it's all positive. Even those who have negative things to say about us, so well, in the short term, we think you're going to have chance, they all agree that the outlook for Nigeria in the long term, if we continue with this disciplined way of working, is positive.
Very
All right,
interesting.
like when she said we have to look inwards, but it's part of what we're talking about. Looking inwards has to do with IGR, in fact, a part of it when it comes to generating resources or generating funds for developmental projects. But is the government engaging the people enough to ensure that they look inwards for us to be able to be self-sufficient or self-dependent?
You see, looking inwards entails or suggests that people would patronize locally made output. But in reality, it's not usually a matter of sentiment. It's more a matter of need and circumstances. When you say that we should rely on local sources, you see, local sources cannot be driven or cannot be energized, or the capacity of local sources cannot be exploited without fundamental pillars which would normally support such expansion.
But Adeosun says the fundamentals are positive.
I think she's probably misadvised or misguided, because the fundamentals that drive any economy successfully everywhere are the fundamentals of inflation, cost of funds, and exchange rate. I don't think you could look me in the face and tell me that those fundamentals are positive. But I can understand that the lie has been sustained because of the belief that it is government revenue or government spending that will drive the economy. As I said, The total amount of spending in this particular year is just about 7.6 trillion, which is about, as I say, $8 billion or thereabouts. Yeah. But in reality, in order to drive the economy, economy that's supposed to be as big as, it used to be 510, then it became 410, now it's about $350 billion or thereabouts. You would require the full mobilization of the real sector, but that can never come about as a result of sporadic interventions. The basic platform of low rate of inflation, certainly not 20%, and that has not stopped, it's still rising. Successful economies everywhere, they would be alarmed at inflation at above 2 or 3%. Okay? Successful economies elsewhere would be alarmed if the monetary policy rate or the central bank rate of that country, which drives the cost of funds to the real sector, is as high as, how much is it now? 14% or thereabouts. Any country that has these indices and then proclaims that we are going to diversify our economy, we are going to do internally generated revenue apart from just taxing the people. Okay, so let's come back to
allocation before Mike goes back to his wall. From 2.01 trillion, FAAC disbursed in 2016. Of course, it went down by 30%, and it looks like it may go down again. That was first half of 2016 compared to 2.89 trillion in first half of 2015. Now, what factors do you think are responsible for this drop? And then again, should we have a situation where you actually have the federal government getting a larger chunk of the allocation as against the local government and the states? Those are the people that are closest to the people, if I could put it that way. Shouldn't it be the other way around?
I don't think it's a question of good judgment here. I think it's a political question. I mean, your question is very straightforward, and the answer is also very straightforward. You know what the answer should be. But it's a political trap in which we have found ourselves, and we need to be able to extricate ourselves from that trap if we truly want to grow. Because you cannot expect any system to grow if reward is based on not on performance, but on factors which are not related to making anything work.
All right, let's get back to this, or we'll be going on a break very shortly, but let's establish what we're doing now. In spite of the nation's poor economic performance in the year 2016, some states still contributed greatly to the country's revenue. Now, revenue generation in these states for 2016 were higher than the previous year, even though we had recession going in there. Now, let's get to, fine. Now, states like Lagos, Ogun, Delta, Kano, Edo, Kwara State, Adamawa State, Kogi State, Plateau State, Benue, Yobe, Kaduna, and Zamfara recorded higher figures for the year, even though there was recession. Let's move on. Now, according to a breakdown of figures contained in the Joint Tax Board, the State Boards of Internal Revenue Report 2016, most of the states raked in additional revenues through road taxes, pay-as-you-earn, direct assessment, MDA's revenue, and other taxes. Now, some states looked into other ways of shoring up revenue for their development, since revenue from the sale of oil declined greatly, meaning a lower federal allocation for states. Let's look at some states and how they have fared in the recession. 2016 was really very interesting. Now, Lagos State is the financial center of the country. The state's effective use of its internally generated revenue ensured that it is not affected by the recession with or without the allocations from the federal government. Another state that has managed well so far is Imo State. Imo State, the new focus on agriculture has helped the government to increase its internally generated revenue volume in the year 2016. Moving ahead, we have Bayelsa State, local population engaged in fishing on a subsistence and commercial level. The state is also a beneficiary of the 13% derivation as a major oil producing state. And in addition, the allocation from the center, no matter how small, has helped the state stay above water or stay afloat, as the case may be. The Kano State is the second largest industrial center in Nigeria. It is the largest state in northern Nigeria with textile, tanning, footwear, cosmetics, plastics, pharmaceuticals, ceramics, furniture, and others, including agricultural implements, food and beverages, dairy products, vegetable oil, animal feeds, all of that. Kano State is a major center for the production of export of agricultural products like hides and skins, peanuts, leather, textile, grains, and cotton. So in 2016, Kano State didn't do badly at all. It did very well in internally generated revenue in the state. Let's move on. Now, Oyo State has vast arable agricultural land that keeps its large population busy, although the state government is indebted to workers. Some of the civil servants still practice subsistence farming as a way of survival and not depend on government. River State is another state known for the production of yam, cassava, cocoyam, maize, rice, and beans, coconut, oil palm, and a number of cash and food crops. Although when it comes to yam, someone's going to ask, River State
River
yam?
State? I mean, I'm
River State yam? River State, well...
I would have thought it's your state.
Yeah, Benue State, when it comes to... It's called the food basket.
The food basket.
All right. Now, the state has reverted to agriculture to maintain its population and the economy. Now, the fishing industry is an important sector in that state. We've heard of oil spillages, but certainly they've still done well. Let's go on a break, and then we come back to dwell on this topic we're talking about. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.
Right, you're welcome back. It's TVC Breakfast, and we're looking at the 2016 FAAC report. And FAAC, of course, would be the Federation Account and Allocation Committee. Federal Account. Federal. Yes, federal. And I guess is Henry Boyo. He's an economist. Now, FAAC disbursements seems to have followed the trend in oil prices, exposing Nigeria's overdependence on oil. Now that it looks like the price of oil is looking up, around $57 a barrel, do you expect there to be changes with the Federation account?
You already have a situation where there appears to be an acute shortage of funds. So if the opportunity comes to receive more income as a result of the higher crude oil prices, I'm sure the government would gladly adopt it or accommodate it. But that is not the only way the government could expand their spending. The chances are, with the very wide gap between the official and the black market rate, the chances are the Naira would see further devaluation sooner than later. And that would mean that for every dollar earned of that $50 or $60 per barrel, government might get maybe 33% more. So in literal terms, you can say that there would really be an expansion in spending. But is that real? Because what you would have is maybe bloated sums of money that buy or do very little, because money has lost value. A situation where the main problem in the country with the management of the economy is the unusual challenge, I should say, of surplus money or too much money at a time that the real sector says, look, we don't have enough money to do business. At a time that the real sector, manufacturers, keep crying for lower interest rates, sensible interest rates of 6–7% across the board, not intervention funds.
But you've consistently, sorry to break you, you've consistently said there's too much money in circulation, and government cannot adopt this attitude of let's continue to pour more money or spend our way out of recession. But the ordinary Nigerian on the street continues to say, look, there's no money. So where is all the money that you say is everywhere?
That is the question I ask, and I think the evidence, of course, of the embarrassment caused by the problem of too much money is when you announce regularly. Already, I'm sure this past 5 weeks of this new year, you would have extolled the virtues of CBN's mopping up of over 1 trillion naira of surplus funds. What do you think it means to mop up excess liquidity? It means to take out surplus funds from the system, because if you leave the surplus funds there, it will instigate increasing rate of inflation. So the question is, how did the surplus funds get there in the first place? And this is the question that everybody shies away from. But you know what? The reality is that the issue of surplus funds is fundamental to our problems. Don't ask me how anything that is surplus becomes expensive. You don't find that tomato becomes more expensive when it is everywhere in the market. But surprisingly, the naira commodity is a very different ball game. You find that it becomes more expensive the more surplus it becomes in the market.
Define all the laws of economics.
So you have a situation where naira continuously is continuously in surplus. The central bank is so embarrassed by the surplus that it has to pay up to 15% in order to take it away from the hands of the banks. Don't tell me what work central bank does to earn the 15% that it used to pay interest ultimately. It either recycles the money it took in the first place or prints some more money. And that would only instigate or further fuel the liquidity situation. But no big deal. The central bank will go there once more and mop up another 1 trillion. And Ngozi would announce at the news at 10 or whatever and say the central bank is helping the banks to control or manage their liquidity. But you are killing yourself by making such announcements. So in reality, you find that it's almost inappropriate to keep talking about sizes of money. You recall at one time they said our total GDP was 510 billion. Then overnight, just by a stroke of a pen, it became 350 or something. And the chances are you probably fall to below 300 and towards 200 and something.
Okay, so now you have
so
a federal
long
government.
as the naira exchange rate.
You have a federal government that said to the states, I think last year, that look, you cannot continue to depend on the FG to give you these handouts. It's time for you to begin to look inwards. Now, with what you've observed so far, looking at all the states, yes, we keep praising Lagos, but some would actually say, look, it would be unfair to place Lagos on the same pedestal as other states. You have a 20-something million population and still counting. How do you compare that with other states? Now, do you see other states actually trying to step up to the plate to ensure that, look, we don't have to rely on the FG for allocations every month? Or
well, I'm sure the states all recognize this. It would be totally inappropriate to expect that with the challenges, no state recognizes that they have to look internally. But the truth, of course, is their efforts and the possibility of success is very, very severely challenged by the structure that drives every economy. If you keep telling states, generate your internal revenue, create industries, do this and do that, industries don't exist on thin air. They must be supported by certain indices. You cannot continue to depend, as I say, on interventions in order to grow your economy when whatever quality of intervention you're putting across as intervention should be the standard in the first place. In other words, you don't say I'm giving out intervention funds to any particular sector or some sectors or 7% or whatever, and all the other sectors can go look for 30% or thereabouts. If you ask a state, go do your internally generated, the states must have an environment where people can borrow cheaply in order to do whatever they want to do. The state must have what you might call consumer demand. If the total spending in that state becomes inadequate, should I say, or inappropriate or insufficient, inadequate is the right word, because of the rate of inflation, the person who was earning in the village 5,000 naira a month 6 months ago probably has 50% less command over the purchasing power of his money than now. So you find it's almost impossible. It's facetious to say states go and do internally generated revenue when you have not created what they call the enabling environment. The enabling environment means that inflation, not in the federal alone, across the board, inflation should be 2%. So you can continue to buy the same things you buy, or you buy some more, but not a situation where every year, whether you are in the state or in the federal or whatever, you lose 20% of your income and you are able to buy less and less, whether at the center or the state. When that happens, it means industries don't have anything to produce because there's nobody to buy because they have less money.
Exactly.
And of course, if inflation is also traveling at 18 to 20%, you cannot expect the cost of funds to come down, because I wouldn't borrow 1 million naira from you at 20%, at 10%, for example, and give you 1,100,000 at the end of the year. If inflation is traveling at 20%, I really would be giving you just 90,000 naira. You would have lost some money. Consequently, you find that when some people, including I've heard even the finance minister say, we should ignore inflation for the moment and break down the cost of funds. The central bank should bring down the cost of funds. And I'm totally alarmed. You know, you cannot be talking of bringing down the cost of funds without bringing down inflation. Because why should I lend you money below the inflation rate? So when educated, intelligent, well-schooled people make this kind of statements, you really wonder, are these the people leading us? Because you cannot be talking of bringing down cost of funds without bringing down inflation. So when you say all the states should do internally generated revenue and you haven't provided the overarching enabling environment, you can say that from here till doomsday, nothing will
change. Okay, we'll come back to this. Let's go on a break, and we come to dwell more on this topic we're talking about right now. Still with us on TVC Breakfast. Right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast. We've been talking about the Federal Account Allocation Committee and funds from there to states and how the states have been faring in Nigeria. Reports for 2016, the year Nigeria officially went into recession, has been very dramatic. Some states had a very rough time. Other states had a way of looking inwardly, if I have to use the words from the Minister of Finance and the call from many analysts that we should look inwardly. Some states were able to break even and stay afloat. We have this morning an economist, Henry Boyle, with us. He's been enlightening us and talking to us about this. Now, Henry, let me come on this. Every year there are projections from the budget. The federal government has its own with its billions. The states have their own. The local governments have their own. All of this money is projected, money is projected, money is projected for the same people or for the same Nigerians, wherever you reside. Is there a way that federal and state governments and even all the strata of governments can have a synergy in their projections so that the budget can be uniform in such a way, or synergy in such, there should be synergy in such a way that they don't work at cross purposes? Money is going here, money is going here, every state determining where they want to go, the federal government determining where they want to go, local governments having their own. Is there a way there can be synergy with all these projections?
That should not be a lesson that should be taught to anyone. There should be a natural movement towards efficiency in whatever you do. But I can see that you are still fixated on the possibility of growth that is totally dependent on government expenditure. And I keep saying you make a big mistake, because the amount that governments spend is relatively inadequate to drive the economy. The amounts that should drive the economy are domiciled in the banking sector. There are trillions and trillions of naira that should be made available for development in the real sector. Because as I say, 7 trillion naira and then another 4 trillion for altogether. I mean, that's nothing for a country of this magnitude if we are looking to grow our gross domestic product and give better life to our people and increase employment as well. What would do that, I need to emphasize once more, so people don't get too expectant that government spending will transform much. If any historical evidence is to go by, trillions have been spent by government over the years and nothing has come out. But those things that should give the private sector the capacity to actually put Nigerians to work, those opportunities are being denied by the central bank's policy that drives inflation nearer now to 20%. And as I mentioned earlier, with inflation at 20%, cost of funds must be over 20%. There is no arrangement that you can do locally to grow industry that would succeed. At least you can never be internationally competitive because the goods you are competing with are coming from countries where 5% interest rate prevails, and they don't have the kind of power problems, challenges we have here. And the government truly supports industrialization and diversification of those economies. But you cannot be paying lip service to diversification and growth of the economy when the blood that should drive that growth, you ignore it as if it's totally unimportant.
More like stifled. Now, the NEITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative report, actually said that this drop in allocation, whether at the federal, state, or local level, do have very dire consequences. What do you think are the fallouts? What would be the consequences with this steady decline in allocation?
Well, I think whoever made that statement is being alarmist. I mean, we've had dire situations for God knows how long. I mean, you know, we've had situations where we have all condoned an arrangement where we pay a cost for nothing. We sustain a system that is not designed to drive industry. A situation, see, the banks are supposed to provide the money, and because of that, the government gives them the authority to create money. The banks have the authority to create money through the instrument of the cash reserve requirement. If a bank has 1 naira and cash reserve requirement is just about 10%, it means the bank can still lend out 10 naira, even though it has only 1 naira, because the cash reserve requirement is only 1%, it's only 10%. So if you have a situation where the banks are making 500 or 600 billion naira for doing absolutely nothing, absolutely, you can quote me on that, absolutely nothing, but just giving back government money. That is the greatest fraud that there is. They are keeping your eyes off the ball. Where, look, let anybody come out and say confidently that what I'm saying is untrue.
So what should we be focusing on? I mean, you have the banks who are saying that they actually playing their own role, but government is not doing its own.
They are being facetious. Both the government and the banks are in collusion, because I say that with all confidence because it is totally inappropriate to suggest that the government does not see that it makes absolute nonsense for you to give the bank 600 billion naira in income annually for borrowing money that government is going to sterilize. Hello? And how can we sustain that kind of arrangement? Already in this particular year, 2017, new year, within 5 weeks, the problem of surplus naira has become so critical that the central bank has already mobbed out 1 trillion naira at rates of as high as 15%. And why would the banks want to look at any real sector?
The 3 tiers of government have shared about 400 billion or so.
Or thereabouts. Meanwhile, the real sector is saying, look, we need money to produce, and we need the cost of funds to also be cheap. But so long as inflation is running at 20%, cost of funds can never come down. So they hide under the camouflage of we are helping you by giving you interventions. How many interventions will you give? And if you continue to give interventions, you expect that after some time, the people or the sector you're giving should be able to survive. But how can the sector survive after you take out the intervention? Because they have to go back to the real market.
Well, that's a big one there. But here we are, 2017, looking into the year. A lot of projections are that 2017 will be a year of some level of recovery, economic recovery.
Deception.
Wow.
It must be. Look, this is not prophecy or anything. Don't you understand? If inflation is going at 20%, cost of funds is at 30-something% or thereabouts, and somebody said, and your exchange rate is likely to fall some more, and somebody said we are going to get growth, you say, my friend, are you coming from Mars or something like that? Because those indices don't lead to growth. Simple. I mean,
so what leads to growth? I mean, you have people who, some analysts will tell you, look, China, for example, inflation is almost through the roof, if I did get it
what
correctly.
Rate of inflation is that? Exactly. Then don't say you don't know.
So, but it's attractive enough for foreign direct investments and all of that. Everybody's going to China. They want to manufacture there and then take it out to other parts of the world.
Ngozi,
so what is China, for example, doing right?
China is doing those same things that successful economies everywhere do. They try to make sure that they protect the social welfare of their people by ensuring that the little income you are getting does not lose value as much as 20% annually, so that every 5 years, if your income is not increasing, you would not be able to buy a loaf of bread with your salary. So China is doing that and ensuring that inflation is kept. There's no successful economy anywhere where inflation is over 5 or 6%. Absolutely nowhere. We're talking of 20%. And China is also not giving, loans are not available to industry in China at 25 or 26%.
Yeah.
Okay? So these are the realities. This is not magic or anything. These are basics. If you don't have these fundamentals in place, no fiscal policy will save you. This is the reality, because the fiscal amount is a minuscule of what is required to drive an economy of $510 billion or more. But the banks who have the mandate to drive the economy, and for which purpose they have been given the mandate to create money and give out credit, you've given them the mandate, they are creating credit, but guess who is borrowing? The government. They're borrowing all the money back.
And not borrowing to pay salaries?
No.
Especially at the state level?
In the case of the central bank, which is really the critical issue here, they are borrowing to sterilize money. And they are paying the banks 15%. I want us to understand this. They are paying the banks stand to earn 600 billion naira or more this year for central bank just borrowing money that central bank is not going to use for anything but going to sterilize because they don't want inflation to go beyond 20%. This is absolute madness.
So where we are now, what strategy, what particular strategy should the government put in place for the year 2017?
Look, if something is bothering you, you find out what is the cause of that thing. Okay, you have found that the origin of the dislocation is possibly inflation. Okay, if inflation is brought to 2%, as happens in successful economies everywhere, cost of funds will fall to 5%. Naturally, you won't be talking of sectoral interventions of 5, 6, 7%. Okay. This is not magic again. This is what happens in successful economies everywhere. So if you have a situation where you are able to bring down inflation to 2% or thereabouts, and you cannot bring inflation down to 2% so long as CBN continues to consciously suffocate the naira with excess liquidity and also makes it possible for the banks to create more money by reducing the cash reserve requirement. Look, if the central bank is truly serious about mopping up excess liquidity at no cost to anyone in this country, they could increase the money, the cash reserve requirement to 75% or 80%. Immediately, the liquidity will dry up. They won't have to borrow. If they don't borrow, the banks will have to go look for the real sector to lend to. But
and the real sector is at the local level.
The real sector is at both the federal and local level.
There are many people who would say, just like yourself, economists like yourself, financial experts, who will say that, look, there is a need for the local government to actually be the driver of the economy. How can we get it to that point where the economy is actually driven by the real sector? Like I said, the local level.
You see, you are confusing something here.
Okay,
the local government, yes, should be the driver of local affairs, but it doesn't necessarily drive the local economy. What drives the local economy are those factors that I have enumerated. Okay, basically, the local government, how much are you getting? The money doesn't even reach them. And even when it reaches them, the requirements are so... Why we say we are short of funds, and we are still committing ourselves to making heavy expenditures in areas of infrastructure and borrowing in order to be able to do so. Why don't we concession these things? And it costs us nothing. Within 5 years, the things will be working. You are collecting taxes. But if you go that straightforward route, there will be no room for chop. That is the bottom line.
Harry Boyo, thank you very much for spending your morning with us. I like the last one. If you go that straight road, there will be no room for chop. Chop. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. We have talked about two major things, or two basic things this morning, talking about population census at first, and then federal allocations this morning, and Henry Boyle was here this morning taking us through the steps that need to be taken. Certainly, we look forward to the government doing something for the people and the real sector taking the drive on. Well, this is where we come to the end of today's edition of the program. I am Mike Okwache.
And I'm Ngozi Alebu. Keep a date with us tomorrow.